Okay, good evening, everyone. We continue with part 2 of the life of the Chazon Ish, who we will be learning his Sefer Emunah B'Tachon, either at the end of today or tomorrow for sure. It's a fascinating biography of a wonderful tzaddik, and we ended off with the stories of the Chazon Ish with his meeting with Ben Gurion and how he was an anti-Zionist but pro-Aliyah person. And so this pro-Aliyah, anti-Zionist position really reflects a concept that the more Jews there are in Eretz Yisrael learning Torah and keeping its mitzvahs, the weaker the power of the secular Zionist ideology will be. And this was really the gist of the Chazon Ish's answer to the Satmar Rebbe. When the Rebbe, who was very anti-Zionist and also anti-Aliyah, the Rebbe supported his stance by citing the Rambam's words. There's a famous Rambam in Hilchos Deos that said, one should flee to the desert rather than live amongst wicked people who pressure him to follow in their ways. So the Satmar Rav was saying that the secular anti-Zionists are Rishoyim, and they're trying to get the religious people to follow their ways. So to this, the Chazon Ish replied to the Satmar Rebbe. He said, the yeshivas and the shuls are our deserts. So therefore he's saying, you don't have to leave Eretz Yisrael, just go into the desert. The desert is the yeshiva. The desert is the shuls. And this, in fact, was the way the Chazon Ish suddenly declared his war on secular Zionists. He did not believe in escaping to Chutz La'aretz so as not to confront them head on. He did not believe that holding demonstrations against the secular Zionists in other parts of the world, he didn't feel it would weaken their power in the same way that one more yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael does weaken their power. One more religious community where Torah thrives in the face of the surrounding secularism weakens their power. And that's what the Chazon Ish was busy doing. Who knows what would have happened had the Chazon Ish not been one of the main big rabbis at that time. Now, just to know, in 1911, he published his first work on the Shulchan Aruch Chaim and in other parts of the Shulchan Aruch. This happened back in Vilna. And it was anonymously done under the nom de plume of Chazon Ish, which literally in English means Chazon is a vision, the vision of man. And the word Ish alludes to the first letters of his two names, Avraham, that starts with an Aleph, and Yeshaya, that starts with a Yud, Karelit. So Aleph, Yud, Avram, Yeshaya, and those are the first two letters of the word Ish. So, and that's the name that he is well known by as Chazon Ish. Now, what's interesting, he was a very great scholar, but as much as he was an academic scholar, he applied himself to practical problems and devoting a lot of effort to the strengthening of Yiddishkeit and Jewish institutions. He gave rulings on the use of the milking machine on Shabbos and on cultivation by hydroponics during the Shemitah year. Those are just two examples of how he made his great understanding of halacha very practical. And again, as a model of modesty and kindness, he still wrote over 40 books, 40 for in clear Hebrew, but a very polished and precise style. As we'll see when we're going to learn the Sefer, not easy to read his works because you could just see the brilliance coming out of him. And as opposed to many of the latter rabbis, such as Reb Chaim Brisker, the Chazon Ish is known for avoiding all this kind of pilpul and all this methodological analysis of Talmudic passages, but he just goes to a more, I hate to use the word simpler or more intuitive approach, similar to the Rishonim, like the Rashi and Tosfos and people like that. And therefore, he wouldn't bring lots and lots of ladder rabbis in terms of his responses. He felt, I'll learn the Gemara as best as I understand. And from the Gemara, just like the Rishonim rendered their laws without any rabbis later, he says, he didn't need it either. It wasn't out of arrogance at all. But he says, I'm learning Torah, and from the Torah and the Gemara, I'll understand what the halacha is. You'll see a little bit later why this happened. It's interesting, the Chazon Ish, as so well-rounded he was in Musar, but did not feel the need to delve in Musar as a formal study. Why? He felt that a life dedicated to traditional Torah study would guide him in the proper path. Now, again, you have to be a very special person like the Chazon Ish, because as he learned Gemara, he really felt like he was learning with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which not everybody is on that level. He very much rejected the elements of the Navardic philosophy, and he felt that their extreme self-effacement and antisocial behaviors that they practice is not a good path to lead one's life. Although Navardic has a lot of followers. And it's interesting, Rav Aaron Leib Steinman once spoke about the fact about studying Kabbalah, and he just, a matter of fact, related that the Chazon Ish had vast knowledge in Kabbalah too. So he really had everything to him. He was the full package, the Chazon Ish. And now let's just share some, I think, beautiful stories that show you different aspects of the Chazon Ish's life. I think it's really important to really see what kind of human being this person was in that book we are reading. I know we're all itching to start into Emunah and Bitachon, but sometimes the person who says the message is just as important as the message. So let's start with a number of stories. One shows his sensitivity to chinuch. There was once a 7-year-old boy who was wildly playing in the room where the Chazon Ish was learning. And a student of the Chazon Ish who was there very much rebuked the boy, screamed at him, very sharply to stop his noisy behavior. And he threatened to tell the boy's Rebbe on him. This was all in front of the Chazon Ish. It was a little boy. And the Chazon Ish quietly told his student that he just transgressed the Torah prohibition of onas dvarim, hurtful speech, that it's forbidden to cause anguish to a fellow Jew, and a threat like that causes anguish to a child. Even a little child, if you scream at a child and threaten him, it causes them anguish. And the Chazon Ish says there's nothing in the pasuk of onas dvarim that differentiates between a child and an adult. So the student asked, well, how do you reconcile with the need to educate the child, give him chinuch? So the Chazon Ish said there's no need for him to be the teacher of the child. The mitzvah of the chinuch is on the responsibility of the child's father. And the Chazon Ish went on to advise this student of his that if the child was disturbing him, he can go and learn in another room, but not to tell the child to stop playing. So again, you see that even little children are part of Torah, and the Chazon Ish was very sensitive to that. Another story that describes his affability was one of his strongest traits, and he really very strictly adhered to the rabbi's dictum of always be the first one to greet somebody. So Gemara talks about one of the Tanoim will greet everyone first. Always be the first one to greet every person. And he understood that every person also means children too. And one time the Chazon Ish was passing a group of children in the street, and many people would ignore children who were playing in the streets. So the Chazon Ish greeted them with a friendly shalom. Now these children were thrilled to be greeted by the Gadol Hador. So the children answered in a chorus, Shalom. So then the Chazon Ish turned around and replied, Shalom. So the kids were so excited, they turned it into a game. And this went back 5 times where the children said Shalom. The Chazon Ish stopped again and said Shalom. And they said Shalom. He said Shalom. To show you that he wanted the children to feel good, that even as it were, the Chazon Ish is like playing a little game with them. In terms of his humility, once regarding a certain public issue, the Chazon Ish stated his very reasoned halachic opinion. There was another distinguished Talmud Chacham, but not in the caliber of the Chazon Ish. He ruled the opposite of the Chazon Ish and was acting the opposite of what the Chazon Ish's psak was. So one of the Chazon Ish's students was very upset about this slight to his Rebbe's authority, and he decided to go to that Talmud Chacham and voice his protest. But before going, he told the Chazon Ish what he planned on doing. And the Chazon Ish strongly objected to him. And he explained that the man in question that the student was going to rebuke was not in good health. And a confrontation of that nature was liable to cause that rabbi harm. So instead, what did the student do? When he went and told that Talmud Chacham that the Chazon Ish had warned him not to discuss that matter out of concern for this man's weakened state of health. So when the scholar heard that, the dissenting scholar heard that, he was so moved by the Chazon Ish's sensitivity that he modified his position regarding this debate and made it more in line with the Chazon Ish's. Another story about, again, how not to give rebuke or how to judge people favorably is that there were people gossiping about a certain Kolo fellow, and they said that his wife didn't cover her hair. Now, in those parts in there, it's Yisrael, they're very Haredi, and everybody covers their hair. And there was, people were talking about it, and everybody was, behind the scenes, this Kolo guy's wife doesn't cover her hair. So the Chazon Ish would never broach such a subject with a student directly. So what did the Chazon Ish do? So in a casual conversation, as they're just talking about anything, he mentioned, I heard there's a place in Tel Aviv. You have to remember, this is like in the 40s. This is the 1940s. It's not 2020 now, okay? Where women can spend $10,000 on a human hair sheitel that looks more real than their own hair. This is the 1940s. So he tells the student just nonchalantly, he said, I heard of a place in Tel Aviv where a woman could buy a wig that looked like natural hair. And perhaps it would be advisable for his wife to buy a sheitel like that. Just mentioning Islam. He wasn't mentioning anything about sheitel, no sheitel. You know what the student answered? That his wife had done just that and had never, ever gone with their hair uncovered. So what do you see? You see that even in the 1940s, you could get very nice sheitels, and nobody could tell that she had her hair covered. And instead of the Chazon Ish rebuking him, he just mentioned nicely, might be a good addition. You might want to, get a nice sheitel, so that avoided that problem. As well, the subtleties of his tochacha. In those days, it was very interesting. If you see today, nowadays, many rabbis wear beards. There was a certain period of time where many rabbis and Talmidei Chacham were clean-shaven, even after they were married. And, a lot of the Hasidic Rebbes try to inspire people to have a beard. I don't want to get into the topic of why married men should wear beards. Certainly rabbis should wear beards. So the Chazon Ish's opinion was that a man should grow a beard. A married man should grow a beard. But he never would tell his Talmidim about it. And many of the students of his were clean-shaven, and the Rebbe never brought it up until one of the students had his first child. And the Chazon Ish gave him mazel tov. And then he says, it's so nice you have a little child. Oh, it's so cute when children like to play with their father's beards. That's all. That's all he said. And the student got the hint and began to let his beard grow. Also, a sensitivity to other Jews. There was the Chazon Ish generally on Friday, on Erev Shabbos, would daven mincha gedola, meaning mincha as early as you can. And there's still probably around 1 o'clock or so. And many Litvish people would do that. And the Chazon Ish would have his own private minyan in his house. So they had 9 people for mincha gedola. So someone went out to recruit for a 10th man. So even the Chazon Ish would have trouble finding a minyan, okay? And he came back with a Hasidic Yid who was willing to complete the minyan. But when the Chazon Ish saw that the man was Hasidish, he didn't want to include him in the minyan. You know why? Because he knew, and he told him, he says, Hasidim have the custom of saying Hodu before Mincha on late Friday afternoon. And the Hasidim usually daven Mincha late, but close to Shabbos, and they say the prayer of Hodu on Friday night. And he says, how can I take away from this chassid that he should daven with us to give me a minyan and miss out on the geschmack of saying Hodu? His whole Shabbos will be not good. So you see that, as much as he needed a minyan, he's willing to wait longer so another Jew will not inconvenience himself because he wouldn't enjoy his bringing in the Shabbos as much as he could, even though he wasn't Hasidish at all. So how did the Chazon Ish merit all this? So again, his brother-in-law, the Stipler Gaon, and really the successor from in many ways, he once remarked that shortly before the Chazon Ish's passing, it became obvious to me that he didn't forget any of his learning, despite the fact that he's in his 70s and failing health. He said the Chazon Ish was fresh in what he had learned decades earlier, as if he studied it now. And the Stipler says, I know with certainty that it was in the merit of his tzidkis, of his righteousness, because he studied Torah Lishma for its own sake without any ulterior motive, and he possessed all the 48 qualities in which Torah is learned. And that's how the Stipler felt he was so great in Torah. We talked about his amelus in Torah, how much he would spend so much time working hard and just focused on the books for hours and hours at a time, using up all his strengths. And they say that he once remarked that when he would write, the Chazon Ish said, was speaking to somebody, in his Sefer Chazon Ish, when he writes his responsa, sometimes he'd write something like, as he's writing the response, and I don't have a copy of this in this Sefer, is presently not at hand. So he clarified, he said, don't think I was writing the tshuva and the Rashba wasn't in my house. But the Rashba was in my house. But when do you think the Chazon Ish wrote his responses? Do you think he wrote his responses when he was full of vim and vigor, like in the middle of the day when he had all his kayach? The Chazon Ish would be learning so hard a whole day, give everything he had, and then there'd be a point where he mamish had no strength. He had no strength. So he'd lie down on a couch. And as he's lying down on the couch, instead of sleeping, that's when he would write his responses. And he write the responses, because he didn't need as much strength to write a response than to study the Talmud deeply. So when he said that the Sefer was not in his hand, he literally meant it wasn't in his hand. It was in the bookcase. But he literally didn't have the strength to get up from the couch, to go to the bookcase, to open up the Sefer to look at. That's what it meant, that it wasn't at hand, to show you that he studied so hard. And when he absolutely had no strength, that's when he wrote his responses. The Rav Aaron Kotler Zichrono Livracha gave a eulogy for the Chazon Ish. And he said that the Chazon Ish enriched the generation with his Torah and his insights. And he was able to reveal and propound in all areas of Torah. And his being was completely sanctified for diligent toil in Torah, without any personal inclinations or obligations. And he said for the Chazon Ish, all areas of Torah were the same. Many of his writings, pertain to factual areas of mitzvah observance, such as measurements and computations, which are not usually conducive for propounding dazzling insights in the Talmud. But he didn't care if it was an exciting, complex piece of Talmud. It was simply to know the truth, to know what the halacha is everything. And he would labor in the things that might not be the most exciting things in the world, but it's all part of Torah. And that's why areas that, incredibly intelligent Rashivas would never think of learning, he said it's all part of Torah. And that's something to be learned. And here's an incredible story, as we're going to be learning about bitachon. It's an unbelievable story. A man appeared, obviously distraught and worn down, knocks at the door of the Chazon Ish. He tells the Chazon Ish that he had been ill for a few days. Eventually, he was so ill that he was hospitalized. The doctors performed a battery of tests, and they found he had a very virulent infection which had invaded his body. And they sadly informed the man that he only had 4 days to live. They had no medication that would be effective for his infection. Now think about that. If God forbid somebody would come to you with that, what would you say to them? So the Chazon Ish, who's complete Torah. Well, the man breaks down, he's crying, and the Chazon Ish soothes him and tries to calm him down. And the Chazon Ish opens a Chumash voracious and turns to the first pages of Parshas voracious. And he said to him, look what Hashem created on the first day of creation. And he began to recite all the things that Hashem did on the first day of creation. Then he says, look what Hashem created on the second day. And the Chazon Ish reads the psukim and listed one by one the things that Hashem created the second day. And so he continued on the third day, and so he continued on the fourth day. He closed the Chumash and said like this. So, if the creator of the world was able to create so many things in 4 days, don't you believe that in 4 days he can create a medicine for you which will heal you completely? So the Chazon Ish encouraged the man not to give up hope, but rather he should daven for himself and plead with Hashem that Hashem should heal him from his infection. He reminded him that the gates of prayer are never locked, especially before the prayer of a sick person, which is always a tefillah in times of tzar. That's what he said to the person. So the eyes of the man lit up at those words. He began to daven fervently for himself. And since he was following the instructions of such a holy man, an unbelievable miracle occurred. A new medicine was imported to Eretz Yisrael from America the next day. And this sick man was one of the first people that the medicine was tested on. And it became clear that the medicine was effective for that very infection that the person had. And with a short time, the fellow was healed completely. Unbelievable. So what was the comfort? It was completely out of Torah. That's how he's looked at everything in life from the lens of Torah. And one of his confidence from Shlomo Cohen says on the pasuk in Chavakuk, Tzadik be'emunaso yichya, Tzadik lives by his faith. And that's what he says, that the Chazon Ish's strength and power were rooted in pure emunah. And he mentioned that the Chazon Ish was weak and afflicted with serious illnesses and conditions. Where did he have such strength and determination and decisiveness? Where did he acquire the broad shoulders to bear the burden of thousands of communal and personal matters, to involve himself in all sorts of dilemmas, as if he had the responsibility of a whole generation on his shoulders alone? And not once did he ever try to remove himself from a problem or ease himself from the load. And he said clearly it was from his emunah. Even a few days before the Chazon Ish passed away, when he was really weak, and his close confidence attempted to turn away those people who were still knocking on his door and seeking his help. And they asked the Chazon Ish, how can you accept visitors under such conditions? You're deathly ill. To which the Chazon Ish responded, how can I turn away those who come to me with broken hearts? It's noteworthy that, as we will learn in this Sefer Emunah Ubitachon, the Chazon Ish explains, he said that character refinement impacts not only one's success in Torah study, but midos development also impacts on one's fulfillment of mitzvahs between man and Hashem. You know, he says there's a misconception that a person can be wholesome in his performance of mitzvahs relating to God alone, though his midas are wanting and he's deficient in his dealings with man. And he says, one who sees to the core of this matter can perceive the foolishness of such a belief. that a Jew who has not refined his midos, you have to realize, is in the clutches of the Yetzer Hara, and it's impossible that he's going to be wholesome in his issues bein adam lamakom. His midos are not good. There's no way he could be perfect between him and Hashem. The fact that he does these mitzvahs in a grand fashion is because this observance doesn't go against his negative traits. But if it'll come up against a negative trait, then his fear of God will not be enough to overcome the Yetzer Hara. And let's conclude with a quote from the Chazon Ish's brother-in-law, Rav Shmuel Greineman, Zichrono Livracha. He says that the Chavetz Chaim would say that the answer to every problem lies in Torah. However, one must know where in Torah to find a given answer and then approach the matter with a pure Torah outlook, which is absolutely free of any foreign attitudes or personal interest. And it's for that reason that so many people, including scores of Rosh Yeshivas, sought the Chazon Ish's counsel, and they always came out with a definitive Torah viewpoint. And Rev Greineman says that the Chazon Ish sought to conceal his awesomeness. And as the Gemara says, he revealed an inch and concealed two. He says, so much remains hidden forever. And he said at the time of the Chazon Ish's passing, who's going to replace his countless acts of charity? And at a funeral, one yeshiva administrator wept, saying that without the Chazon Ish, he doesn't know how his institution is going to continue. And nobody knew the Chazon Ish was helping that institution so long. And even common secular people were in awe of him. Let me just share one quick story. I had an uncle and aunt who lived in Eretz Yisrael. My uncle Shrulik and Tante Miriam lived in Tel Aviv. And after the war, they were very secular people. And after many, many years, while my mother and her sisters all lived in America, in Cleveland, this one sister, her sister lived in Tel Aviv. So they finally came to America for a visit. They stayed by my aunt and this and that. They were staying all around. And the last day of the trip, they'd have to go to the airport. And at the time I lived in Tel Yeshiva, which was a little closer to the airport. So my secular aunt and uncle were going to spend the night by the Kollel apartments. So I bring them into my very modest home. And he's a very friendly guy, Uncle Shrulik. And he's going to our small little Kollel apartment. And then he sees a picture on the wall. And this was a picture I had on the wall of the Chazon Ish. And as he saw that picture, he was like dumbfounded. He said, where do you have such a picture of this? Where did you find this? Where did you get this? So I didn't think it was a big deal because, in the yeshiva, everybody's got a picture of the Chazon Ish, He says, do you know who this is? I said, yes, it's the Chazon Ish. And then he starts extolling about the Chazon Ish. He was such a tzaddik. He was such a this. He was such a that. He loved Jews. He did this, he did that. Oh, it was so bad when he passed away. It was like totally, this uncle was so secular. But he saw a picture of the Chazon Ish, and he said, that's exactly how the Chazon Ish looked. Unbelievable. So where did they get such a picture of him? I'll have to stop. I have only one more story to tell. So tomorrow we'll finish up with that last story, and then the Ezras Hashem for sure will begin the Sefer inside, and we'll begin to see written inside what came out of such an amazing person. Okay, we're going to stop for now. We're going to shut off, and then we will begin the Parsha class in a moment. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, have a good night.